This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. We are going to be doing a year-end wrap-up on all things law enforcement and talking about some of the issues across Canada, some big-ticket items, and then we'll get into a bit of the nitty-gritty on a few of those things. For that, I've got Brian Sauve returning to the program, and if you haven't seen him or heard him on this show yet, he is the president and CEO of the National Police Federation. They represent the members of our federal law enforcement service, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So welcome back, Brian.
Oh, thanks for having us, Nathan. Great to be part of the discussion.
Hey, I appreciate you coming in here. I always see you guys, you're always doing stuff with Parliament and you're out there traveling across Canada. So, I mean, you're busy and the whole organization's busy. I really appreciate what you're doing for law enforcement, mainly because a lot of what you're doing there does have a trickle-down effect to the municipalities. So, yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a busy 3 months, like wrapping it. I don't think we've had a busier federal perspective in recent memory. And then obviously in the last quarter of the year, all the provinces are putting together all of their budgets for next year. So we have input there, or we try to create a reasonable submission for different provinces to think about how they spend their public safety dollars. And then there's been a bunch of elections too, right? You know, the federal one, obviously, but then Newfoundland, Labrador had a provincial one. You had the Yukon, you had Nunavut, all places where our members serve. And, you know, obviously we want to educate our members about the different platforms, about different parties, so they can, you know, make an educated choice as to who they're going to vote for. We're nonpartisan, like we don't pick a party or anything like that, but we can definitely write to all the parties and those seeking election and ask them some questions. And then if they give us answers, then we'll share that to our membership. So,
you know, that's one of the things I was wondering. So recently you were at, I'm going to say, the House of Commons, and you were talking about intimate partner violence. And then you were also, you were talking with them about Bill C-12. You know, just some of the stuff that you end up picking up on and going and speaking on behalf of, I never would have thought that was an association's job or that they would get involved with that stuff. You know, even when you're talking about some of the funding for different equipment or the federal funding, you know, I never would have thought to go to my association and ask them for these type of things. So one of the things I was wondering for the NPF, how do you decide what you're going to, I guess, lobby for or debate on, or, you know, just topics in general that you're going to pick up on? Because some of it, I feel like, isn't that the RCMP proper their job to do? You know, we need more money, we need equipment. That sounds like it should be the RCMP's job. I get the union is going to, you know, vouch for their members, they're going to fight for their members, but ultimately I would have thought that would have fallen to the greater organization themselves.
I think so. Interesting. Yes. I think a lot of it should fall to the organization if you trust that the organization is going to provide the membership on the grounds perspective. I think our membership appreciate the fact that, you know, today you have an organization that can lobby and speak to changes to provincial, federal legislation that might impact how they do their job. And from our perspective, you know, we're a little different than a municipal or a provincial police agency because we can't actually bargain at the table anything that's governed by legislation. So, for example, our pension is off the table. We can't bargain any of that stuff. our workers' compensation benefits veterans through Veterans Affairs, that's off the table. We can't bargain any of that stuff. Disciplinary regime is governed by the RCMP Act for our code of conduct. We can't bargain any of that stuff. So all those little pieces that have a day-to-day impact on members' total compensation regime, their pension, their benefits, stuff like that, but also disciplinary sides of the house, but also the Criminal Code of Canada. And Section 810, for example, like that was actually a very difficult appearance for me because never having been a victim of domestic or intimate partner violence, trying to provide a perspective, sitting there with one group that is representative of survivors and the other that is advocating for survivors to make it better, and talking about I kind of expected to be the enemy in the room, right? Representing the police, and you don't do enough and you can't do enough. But it ended up being a very fulsome and really productive discussion because everybody there was looking for solutions. How can you make Section 810 of the Criminal Code better? How can you make it more enforceable? How can you have more trust from survivors or victims of intimate partner violence to utilize that and feel comfortable calling the police, knowing that something can be done? And that has an impact, I think, on our membership day to day and whatever recommendations they make to Parliament to make legislative change, but also on every police officer in Canada. So, you go back to bail reform. There was a study that Parliament was doing on bail reform, which led to the tabling of their legislation. But, the Canadian Police Association was there, the Toronto Police Association was there, and I was there, all three of us as part of a panel, just talking about the members' perspective about repeat violent offenders and youth getting recruited into all of this stuff. So I think it's important that federally and provincially legislators hear from the associations what impacts they are hearing from their members on the ground. And like you talk about C2 or C12, they're almost the same, similar, one without lawful access, one with. You talk about C14, the bail reform piece, and upcoming, I think there's C9 is coming down the road, which is going to deal with hate crimes in Canada. So, we'll probably have a perspective on that. C5 was interesting. The Budget Implementation Act, now C15 is out, and that has an impact on funding for the RCMP, changes to Superannuation Act accumulation. So we're going to want to have our say in there to speak to that. So
I guess it almost sounds like if you're looking at the municipal side of it, the associations here would kind of wait more until bargaining time to voice their concerns or any of the changes they want, whereas you have to maybe be more proactive on that throughout a year or coming up to bargaining time because, like you said, you can't specifically bargain for certain pieces there.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's that piece, but like Alberta specific, for example, the government of Alberta now has a police review commission.
Yeah.
Right? So the police review commission is going to deal with everything ACERT, and it's going to deal with everything Police Service Act, and it's going to deal with everything RCMP discipline and CRCC. So, like, I think, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure the Alberta Fed associations actually had some input and spoke about how that would impact the members in Edmonton, Calgary, the Alberta Sheriffs, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Lakeshore Regional and stuff. And what that's going to do to change their day to day. I know we did, and we were discussing back and forth with the Solgen in Alberta about what that might look like and how we can make it better or how we can help you succeed. Because I think from the general premise, everybody wants the same thing.
Yeah.
They want a happy and safe Canada from a policing perspective and from a justice perspective and stuff. But some aren't familiar with the law enforcement environment. So they're elected to be an MLA or an MNA or an MP. And I think they need to hear from the boots on the ground about how changes to legislation, provincially or federally, will actually have an impact on creating a safe and happy Canada.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that because this is part of the reason why we started getting some of the politicians and different people to come out on ride-alongs with us when I was in the gang unit, because at the time, and this might be a bit critical of management, but at the time, we didn't think that the messages that we needed to get through were getting through. So it's like, why don't we just bring someone out to the ground level and we'll show them from the constable, the sergeant level? Because if we wait for something to go 8 layers up through the chain of command, the message has totally distorted. It has totally changed. And now it's someone else's message. But we're just trying to show that ground truth of what is actually going on. Hey, you change this law. This is what it looks like when we try to implement it. This is how it's interpreted. This is how it's applied. All those things. So, I think that's critical to have that perspective for especially politicians.
Oh, exactly. And federally and provincially, obviously, all these MLAs, all these elections, and new people taking on roles out of the goodness of their heart. I believe that all politicians get into that business to make positive change. So education of them about, what kind of training does a police officer go through? So, for example, our minister right now, Gary, the Minister of Public Safety, right? He's actually been out to depot in Regina. And he's toured around. He's done some of the stuff because he's an MP from Brampton. Not necessarily the kind of place where you're going to see an RCMP cruiser going to a domestic violence call. So, his lived experience is not RCMP and contract policing. So let's expose him to that. I know he's been out to Alberta, BC. He's done some ride-alongs and actually had that ground level experience, which changes perspectives because he learns more about exactly what the RCMP does in a broader thing. So to your point, exactly that. Get them on the ground so that they can learn and they can see what impacts legislation has and funding has and all those things.
I wanted to ask on that too. Do you coordinate any of these asks or recommendations that you put up to the policymakers? Do you coordinate anything with the RCMP itself? Like when you want to make an ask, if you say, hey, we need more funding, the fenced federal funding, like something like that, would you go at it together?
We do, usually from different angles though.
Yeah.
And this goes back to, it's how you develop relationships, right? So I can safely say that through the evolution of the NPF and all of the good work that's been done by our board, the reputation that we've built with management of the RCMP all the way up to the commissioner is productive, collaborative, and we want to work in concert to achieve a common goal. That's, happy, healthy members that aren't overburdened, have, a decent work-life balance, all that great stuff. So you want to accomplish that goal. How do we get there? Right. And, obviously you've seen a lot of our push lately last year and into this year was the federal policing program because of a new president, challenges with border security, Arctic sovereignty, 51st state and stuff. Okay. We've done a lot of research. We put together a future report. You saw a former prime minister had a white paper on the way out the door that said, tear it down. It's not working. So our response to that was a lot in concert with the RCMP about, well, actually, our model works pretty darn good. And here's why. And by the way, if you want to make it work even better, here's what you can do. And that comes from, having the RCMP leadership basically saying, we can't say this, but you guys can.
Yeah. Okay.
So we end up kind of being the, we'll advocate for the same things, right? The RCMP will do it in a politically neutral way because they're serving at the pleasure of a minister and a ministry. But we can say it with a little more spice.
That's kind of what this podcast, I've had those remarks with the podcast as well. The brass might be like, we wish we could ask certain things or say certain things or say it in a certain way. But, because of our positions and the roles we play, we can't. But we don't necessarily say we disagree with what you're putting out there.
No, and sharing of information. For example, like our federal budget submissions that we do, we probably ask for a little bit more than what the RCMP is asking for, but the priorities identified in those federal budget submissions, or even provincial, like British Columbia or Alberta or Saskatchewan, all the way down the road, we'll work with the commanding officers of those divisions and say, hey, where do you need money? Where do you need an investment from the province that the province can do? Or same with the commissioner or the chief human resources officer. Where do you see pressure points? And then we'll work through making our own submission that will try to address the pressure points, probably from a different lens than the RCMP will do it. But what you end up with is governments hearing essentially the same story from 2 to 3 different sources.
That's good because, someone might not, if they don't have that experience, they don't have the experience in Western Canada, as we were saying about Ananda Sangari there. And it's like, so maybe somebody from the east side of the country can explain it in a way that makes sense to people on the east side. Like, it's just, you have to have those different perspectives, because then you're coming at a person from a different angle, and maybe one resonates more. Maybe they understand it because they're using certain language or experience that they can relate.
No, I definitely. And, like the current Attorney General, Sean Fraser, so he comes from a contract environment, right? He's elected out of Nova Scotia. So he's very familiar with the RCMP on the ground and all that great stuff. So got a very good relationship with him. We talk back and forth about ideas about tabling legislation and where are the pressure points, because he has seen it, and his lived experiences, the RCMP are on the ground dealing with domestic intimate partner violence, bail reform, repeat offenders, and all that great stuff. So I think when you have elected officials that have been in some exposure to the law enforcement public safety continuum, whether it be in the mental health side of the house, or whether it be bail reform, or whether it be corrections or policing, right? They proactively reach out and have a discussion about what might make sense and where can we do the best, knowing that there's only one taxpayer, right? And dollars are finite. So how do you make the most of what you've got there?
One of the topics that was coming up was obviously Alberta is looking at the provincial police, but I saw that BC recently committed to not making a push for provincial police, and I want to kind of understand that situation a little bit more. So, have they signed beyond the end of their contract, or are they just saying they're going to do that? I guess once it's actually expired.
Well, I think you're starting to see. If we go back a year and a half, the previous minister, Dominic LeBlanc, wrote to all the provinces and territories about the government of the day's commitment to contract policing beyond 2032. Because in 2024's budget federally, I think they allocated $20+ million to actually start those renewal negotiations to Public Safety Canada. So the minister wrote to all the provinces and territories, says, we're here. They had completed their own study with all of our contracting partners, municipalities, provinces, and stuff. So they published their What We Heard report, which was essentially, we want more RCMP, not less. But we would also like to see these improvements, like improvements in procurement. And the RCMP and the government of Canada, I would say, haven't been great. Like, for example, if they're going to roll out a new PC, they might just do it and then say, oh, and here's the bill.
With no consultation type thing.
Yeah, and that's difficult. If I can see it's difficult if you're a municipality, because you got to set your budget right in November or October, and then in January you find out, oh crap, we didn't allocate funds for body-worn cameras, And now we're getting a bill for body-worn cameras, right? So that's where they wanted to see improvements, is better consultation knowledge to be able to prepare their budgets for the future. So there was that in, I think, May 2024. Then you obviously had turmoil federally. You had an election. You had a new minister. There was that whole white paper by the former prime minister. But now we have a new government, which is, again, committed to contract policing beyond 2032. It's taken a while to get there, but this minister has said it at the FPT meetings, the feds, the provinces, and the territories, where all the ministers meet, that we're here if you want us. He gave evidence at the Senate committee that, yeah, we're there, we're good to negotiate and carry forward. And then you had the Nova Scotia policing standards, I think, was a bit of the tipping point for provinces and territories. So Nova Scotia launched their policing standards in, I'm thinking September, August, late summer, early fall. They'd been ready for about a year and a half, but they finally launched them and implemented them. That gave the minister in Nova Scotia and the premier there basically said, with these standards, we are committing to the RCMP as our provincial police service, and we will carry on with them as long as they are willing to go forward. So keep moving forward in time, and our minister is out with the new Minister of Public Safety, or Solicitor General in BC, Nina Krieger, because they had a bit of a cabinet shuffle under Evie's government. And then she came out publicly and said, we're committed to the RCMP beyond 2032, so we're here when you want to negotiate and renew contracts. And I know internally, right, Saskatchewan is committed, Manitoba is committed. Alberta, now that they have an MOU for a pipeline, has been less vocal about ditching the RCMP. So who knows? I think that whole thing was political from day one, and we'll see where it goes. And the territories, it's by legislation that we're up there, so really it's just renewal or renegotiation of those three agreements. And now you've seen PEI has new standards. Newfoundland has a brand new government, a switch in government, and in that government's campaign and their platform, they committed to reinvestment in the RCMP. So I don't think contract policing is going anywhere. And for British Columbia, it was really that minister, the provincial minister, confirming that the Special Committee on Reforming the Police Act, which was, I think, 2021, that made a recommendation to explore two things: regional policing where appropriate, like Victoria, Vancouver-ish, those areas, and possibly a provincial police service. They've basically shut it down and said, no, we're committed to the RCMP and we're happy to renegotiate and move forward.
Because you mentioned a couple times now that white paper that Trudeau had released when he was on his way out. Do you know why that was done? Like, why they just decided to throw that out there just as they're kind of walking out the door?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was his last day. It was the Monday, as he was done Monday afternoon, and then he sat down Monday morning with a reporter and talked about it. Nobody knows why.
I thought it was strange. I was like, this guy hasn't really been a big law and order guy the whole time he's been in here, and all of a sudden he just throws his paper out there.
Yeah, nobody knows why, and I know within the RCMP it's not supported. And then we did a lot of work when we found out it was coming out, that even Public Safety Canada and now this current government, even the opposition parties, were not supportive of that particular paper leading into the campaign, right? As they were starting to campaign. So. And I think I appreciate that. We know it doesn't matter the government; it's support beyond, like, that's just turmoil. Like, can you imagine? In Canada now, we're just going to tear apart the fabric of one police agency that unites all police agencies to create 7 different ones. Like, let's create a DEA, an ATF, an FBI, Homeland Security. Like, really?
Well, and we have enough trouble well, we're going to get into the federal side of things here with the discussion, but it's like we're having enough trouble with that as is. Yeah, creating this stuff overnight, I think, would be a bit of a shit show, to say the least. Um,
Oh, yeah.
but and I guess kind of on that, maybe we'll kind of switch to the federal side of things. So um, there was a bit of a commitment to federal funding, but it's not fully fenced off as I've understood it. Maybe there's been some updates since I've been reading stuff, but I'm just wondering, like, in the report, I've got it sitting next to me here from June that the NPF put out. So this is the RCMP Facing the Future, Evolution, Integration, and Readiness report. Um, in that, there's kind of you have like a timeline, and it just shows like decades of recommendations that have been made but not really followed through on. And I think the federal side is a big part of this, where it's like, you know you're the only police service that can do what you're doing, but there's no commitment to it. What I kind of wanted to get was what your take on why that is. Like, why don't the politicians just set the money aside and say, we don't mess with this money? Like, there's nobody else to do this, and it's of critical importance. If I'm going to go back to like uh, high school days and talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's the safety and security are the foundation of all the other stuff that we have here. Why is it seen as kind of like a thing that we can just reach in and take from whenever we feel like?
Well, I mean, a couple things. In that Facing the Future report, I think we quote the Red Surge revival, basically from a number of senators that did a red paper years ago, and they were basically saying the RCMP needs a serious investment in funding in order to accomplish the mandate that has been given. So, an unrepresented workforce throughout that entire time, all the way up until almost 2020. So the ability for government throughout, the last 50 years, and as you know, different politicians get elected, different parties form, and different majorities are created, and they have their priorities. So some federal governments over the last 20 to 30 years, priorities of efficiency or deficit reduction or budget balancing, or priorities of immigration, priorities of growing Canada, or priorities of job creation, or whatever. Few of those priorities federally have actually been public safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and if they were a game of whack-a-mole, right? So, okay, you got the BC money laundering report from the casinos that pop up, and then, okay, well, now we got to take our existing resources, they don't add more, and move to that priority. So what are you giving up? You're giving up election interference to work on casino money laundering, or you're giving up cybersecurity investigations to work on.
We see this at the front line, though, too. It's hey, we have homelessness here, we've got tents here, we've got drugs here. So they shift all the resources over there. But when we start cleaning up that area, they just go to the area we left. So, like, it's just, whack-a-mole. It's just a big kind of shell game in some ways. We're just moving things around, but we're not adding to it.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that we've been trying to do and I think we're starting to see some success. We started to see success in British Columbia in 2020, late 2021, late 2022. Was the first time British Columbia actually authorized the filling all the way up to the annex for the BC RCMP. So every position was funded now. And it took 3 years. It's tiered funding. So now, as of today, every provincial police service position in British Columbia is funded, and almost all of them are occupied. Right. So making some success there. Like, if you're going to complain about deployment models, you're going to complain about service times or response times in Alert Bay or in Seke Dene, bad example, that's a First Nations police agreement, or Fort St. John or Fort Nelson. Well, you should give us the bodies that are there, but you haven't provided the funding. So now our next task there in BC or in other places is to increase the annex, because they've funded us all the way up to 2012 levels, right? Because the last contract was signed in 2012. We're coming up on the end of 20 years. So let's get those actual numbers up. But the whack-a-mole side is interesting because it comes down to federal policing and different governments' priorities, right? So January this year, obviously, border security became a big priority. So federal policing resources are now diverted to reinforcing and bolstering border security to satisfy that particular need. What gets sacrificed, right? Is it, I don't know, proceeds of crime investigations? No idea. But something gets sacrificed because and then now you're seeing a reinvestment in federal policing, adding 1,000 new personnel, hopefully 1,000 new police officers to bolster that so that maybe they can use less whack-a-mole, right? Have more resources on the border security, more resources available to all of those other priorities to be able to do what they're going to do, which is exactly what that Red Surge Revival report spoke to. But they were saying you need 5,000 more. We're starting with 1,000. That's a good step.
Do you think you're getting a lot of traction with the current government? I mean, we're only, we'll say a year into this government. Are they pretty receptive to a lot of what you've been asking for?
Well, based on their, I would say this government is moving quickly.
Is it moving quickly though because of like all the Trump stuff, right? They're trying to say save face in a lot of areas and make some different changes. I get that.
Yeah. They're moving quickly. I shouldn't say this government is moving quickly in the Trump stuff. Really, it was the previous government. Because if you go back to December last year, so under Trudeau's, just before they ended up proroguing all that great stuff, like he made a 1.6 or $1.3 billion announcement of investment into the CBSA and the RCMP. And that's how we got these Black Hawk helicopters leased and patrolling the borders, which really looks good to the United States and all that great stuff. And we can talk about the effectiveness of those helicopters separately. But, and then obviously you went into an election, and then we have a new government, and a new government's platform is to bolster human resources for the RCMP, but also to invest heavily into the RCMP and its technology and its equipment so that it could do a better job in federal policing, but also be able to train more members coming out of depot to be able to deliver into the contract provinces. So, yeah, moving quickly. Receptive, I think, yes. And the reason I say receptive, and it's not that I think you go back to July or August 2024 under the Trudeau government. Again, we did our federal budget submission early August. Within that was 2 items that ultimately made it into one campaign platform early spring. Didn't ask for that, right? But clearly someone was paying attention, and they picked up on. We were asking 2 years in a row now, for 1,000 new members into the federal policing program. And then, surprise, surprise, it shows up in a campaign platform. It's like, oh, okay. The same with the cadet training allowance, right? $525 a week going to 1,000. We'd actually asked for it to go to 1,200, and that was almost 2.5 years of lobbying for that. And then, surprise, surprise, it ends up in a campaign platform, and now it's in a budget. So I think we're gaining some traction, and the invitations, I've spent, I think, half a dozen days at different committees on different pieces of legislation with different areas of Parliament. And we're not proactively asking to be involved in those things. They're actually reaching out to us.
Oh, really? Okay.
To come and talk. So I think it's been good. And they're all party committees, right? Not necessarily this government. So we, cautiously optimistic that people are starting to listen, and from our perspective, I think it helps that we're not on one side or the other side of an issue. Is that we can present both and say, you guys make up your mind, but here's the pros and the cons of two things. So yeah, we could do electronic monitoring with GPS bracelets for 810 peace bonds. Cool. But you're going to have to figure out the privacy implications to that, because nobody's been charged with an offense.
Yeah.
Right. So,
All right.
so it's like there's two sides to every coin. Bail reform is interesting. It's federal legislation. Cool. Great. But you guys have to work with the provinces and territories to get them to invest too, because it's provincial court judges, it's remand seats, spaces, it's probation or provincial monitoring of that stuff. Right. It's something outside of the Fed's control. So
I would think, I want to say on that too is I think it's lost on members sometimes, but also a lot of the special interest groups, the people who are doing all the lobbying, the amount of stuff that goes on. You ask for one thing, 12 other things have to happen for that one thing to become a reality and then to continue to function. So, you're bringing up some really good points there. One thing, just before we kind of get onto like what's coming in 2026, I just wanted to ask about this firearm buyback or confiscation or wherever people call it. Does the NPF have any insight into this? And I'm not gonna say recommendations, but like, is there anything that you tell your members when it comes to this? Because I find it super confusing, and every province has different things they're telling their law enforcement to do, and it's it just seems like an absolute disaster, to say the least. But I'm trying to make sense of like what are the police services going to do about it, because I know like I haven't heard anything in particular in our service about it. I just know what the province has been saying here, but then every province is saying something different. So,
Yep.
as the national police representative, is there anything you've been putting out to your members, or any direction that they've received that you're aware of?
It's a shit show.
Yeah.
To use your expression. And actually, we were just talking about legislation and governments listening to police and all that great stuff. I think, Bill C-21 at the time, 2020, is a prime example of a government doing something without hearing the other side.
Yeah.
And how, here we are 4 years later, 4.5 years later, and it's a total shit show. There was the pilot project that was agreed to by the Cape Breton Regional Police Service and their chief without consultation with their association.
Yeah.
So there was some pushback internally about how effective that was going to be, and their members being put in that position. Surprise, surprise, not only 2 weeks ago, that chief retires. And the pilot project was probably less than fruitful or successful in Cape Breton. And then you got the province of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta that are talking about passing provincial legislation that's going to exempt their residents from complying with whatever this buyback program might be, which is weird, because how often do you see premiers trying to insulate their residents from a federal, like, it's kind of like, okay, we're going to create a provincial piece of legislation that absolves you from this part of the criminal code. Doesn't apply here, right? So it's just a shit show.
Even on that discussion, though, I feel like, okay, so maybe the police services they're not going to show up at your door and demand your guns. They're not going to write a search warrant and come into your place. The feds might say, well, fine, but you can't renew your passports. Like, it could be, there could be a whole bunch of things, like anything you need a federal service for. Like, maybe you're going to have some issues crossing a border one day. Like, or you cross into a province that does enforce it, and maybe they pick you up on a warrant. Like, there's just so many bad directions that this whole thing can go for people. I'm going to say on the legal side that have legally obtained firearms. Not to mention that there are a lot of members who are firearm owners. There are a lot of members who have family that are firearm owners. And so, this is definitely done without consultation, and I don't think it was very well thought out.
Well, I mean, I'm one of them. Like, I've got two rifles at home. I've got a 30-30 and I got a Remington 870, just a shotgun, right? So, but yeah, I think it is not going. I think there's a reason that it's not a topic of discussion to move forward with this particular government, is because I think they're realizing that it was overbroad. Order in council was kind of a way to bypass the parliamentary process to make it that. And now it's like, how do we do this? It's our understanding, and my understanding the last time I was present, even the Cape Breton Regional pilot project, was if a gun owner wanted to hand over their guns, they could voluntarily call 1-800-GET-MY-GUN and then arrange an appointment for someone to come by. So the idea then, or for that, was that it was all going to be consensual. And it's not like, the cops are coming in with an ERT team to take your 22, right? If you will. But yeah, talk about, I think, not seeing the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And now we're dealing with, where are we? And we don't have a compass.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
I think you're totally right there. Just as we're kind of coming up to the end of the time, I want to get your take on what's coming in 2026. So for your members, but also policing in general, anything that you kind of see on the horizon or that you are working on at the NPF?
So we're working on, obviously, the lawful access piece and legislation. We've been invited to talk to a number of different MPs and different working groups about that's the piece that one of the pieces that got pulled out of C2 to move forward with C12, and some of the challenges, because I think there was a communications failure from all parties to Canadians and civil liberty groups about what that means. Like, when you have all Five Eyes
when you
countries,
talk lawful access, you're talking about access to the phones, or like when people are crossing the border.
Yeah. Subscriber information, those types of things. For example, an IP address that's registered in the United States, someone is using that IP address in Canada to allegedly commit a crime, doing a production order. You can't actually get it from the States because you don't have lawful access to that. And the reverse is true, right? If an American or someone internationally is committing crime using a Canadian lawful IP address, right? Being able to execute those and get the subscriber info and all that great stuff in a timely manner, because some of these IP addresses, they last for minutes, not necessarily months or years. So working on that to advocate for how it would impact our members. We're mostly going from the perspective of cybercrime, proceeds of crime, and child exploitation and child pornography, because those are the ones that I think Canadians resonate with.
Yep.
And then, the Budget Implementation Act, obviously, it's still, they're gone for the winter or for Christmas, so it'll come back. There are some things in there that we're a little concerned about, so we want to get some clarity on it. It's the changes to indexation of Veterans Affairs disability benefits is proposed in that legislation. So we want to figure out what that means. And if it has a real detrimental impact, maybe have it amended. There's some changes to our actual pension indexation. So, and still getting the details, but, in 2019, the CPP and the QPP were increased in contribution levels and insurable earnings, but they never actually modified our Superannuation Act contributions to reflect that. So theoretically, our members have actually been paying too much into their pension for the last 5 years. So, okay, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to refund them? Or are we going to leave it in? Or are we just going to abandon this? So there's a few little things that are going to happen in the spring. We're still obviously in negotiations for a third collective agreement. That'll carry on into January, February, March, April. Who knows how it's going to go? Making some progress at that table. Yeah, and well, hey, we have a board election next year, so I'm up for re-election. I know there's about half of our board is going to be up for re-election should they choose to run again. That'll be an interesting process, and then we're developing more international partnerships,
Okay.
with the FBI Agents Association, talking with the New York State Troopers Association. The state troopers have a global United States group where a lot of them get together and they talk about different things that are happening in Montana, Wyoming, Florida, Georgia, whatever. So developing those relationships, because the similarities about how they do their job are very similar to us.
Yeah. That's why I have a lot of American guests on here. I mean, and I say to them all the time, like you call this, a battery, we call it an assault. But it's the same thing. Like there's just small technical differences in a lot of respects, but you learn so much just by getting outside of the normal bubble that we kind of find ourselves in. So I'm glad that
Yeah, for sure.
you brought up the pension and the VA stuff, because I think it's very important not to forget those who served before us and are now in retirement or off for physical or mental health leaves.
Yeah.
Super critical that they don't get left behind.
Yeah, and we've, I mean, to the deployment model perspective, we got a lot of working groups with the RCMP, and we've actually been, our colleagues in Europe, for example, and you'll appreciate this being in the prairies. I appreciate it having lived in the prairies, but our deployment model in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and the challenges that they face in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut are actually extremely similar to what our colleagues in Norway, Finland, and Sweden face.
Okay.
When you think about remote
Yeah.
access, healthcare, and you're the only government, right? So how do they deal with it? And it also is very similar to what the Texas State Troopers face, right? Because they have gluts of areas in Texas that are widely populated and quite full of services, but then they've also got the small little places that are remote.
Yeah.
And so how do you get someone in there that's willing to stay there and how do you staff those spots? Which is very similar to us, like northern Saskatchewan, different parts in the north, and Nunavut, northern Manitoba, and figuring out how you can incentivize members to actually take those spots.
Did you see that? Was it from the Oka Reserve? I can't think of the name now, but there was a chief there, and they were looking for some solutions about how to stop some of this cross-border, all the movement of illicit substances. So they went down and were talking to the guys in Texas. I thought that's great.
Yeah. I think I was on a panel with the deputy chief from the Mohawk Regional Police Service, and yeah, we've and then of course training, right, within depot. I know the RCMP is looking at. I mean, they're at record numbers of applicants. Great, but the problem, it's a really good problem that they have now, is there's too many applicants. They can't process them.
Yeah, I saw you're getting about 20,000 a year, and you're trying to increase the capacity for depot.
Yeah. So there's, so in the midst of all of these challenges, right, the government has sat back and said every government agency has to be more efficient. So the RCMP is trying to be more efficient with their administrative duties and headquarters and stuff. Well, that has an impact on how quickly they can process an applicant. And, as you know, if I'm a Calgarian, young 22-year-old, I'm going to apply to Calgary. I'm probably going to apply to the RCMP. I might apply to Edmonton. I might apply to Lethbridge. The first one to call is probably where I'm going to go.
Yeah. Yep.
So for us, that slow burn to get into the RCMP is actually hurting the ability to get folks at depot. So they'll get up to 2,000, give or take, cadets next year. But maintaining that is getting that efficient administrative process internally.
Maybe I'll just ask you the one last thing on this since I got you here. The streamlined process. So bringing in applicants that might not necessarily go through depot, but if they've got a specialization in a certain area, or, everybody hates working on frauds, and we can find people who are experts in that, and we can just streamline them right into that. Like, if we want to find the best of the best, and go straight into the universities and recruit someone who has like a very technical, specialized skill to work on a certain crime type, is that something that the government or the RCMP, like, is everybody kind of on board and they're trying to make this happen? Is it jammed up anywhere?
Well, I think that was explored, and I think we speak to it in the Facing the Future report about maybe having 2 or 3 different streams to train in. It's been kind of shelved, sidelined, and more. Yes, if there's a forensic accountant that graduates from Dalhousie and they really want to work in law enforcement, do we want that person to wither away for 4 or 5 years in contract policing and perhaps lose their relevant skills in forensic accounting? Or can we send them to depot? Still got to do all the training, but deploy you in some kind of a financial crimes field. So yes, there's still that idea about maximizing skill sets for IT, cybersecurity, all of those great things, but they're probably going to be few and far between. Like, I'm talking with the commissioner, he's thinking that, if we get to a point, it might be 30 a year.
Okay.
That those thresholds. So the idea was great. But it's come, like, do we want to invest in a completely different training program that's really only going to deal with 1 troop a year, if that? So no, it's kind of gone by the wayside, but they are expanding their training to look at quasi law enforcement. So fisheries and oceans officers, they got some training, right? They carry guns, right? Alberta sheriffs, CBSA, BC sheriffs, like they got some training, but they don't qualify under our experienced police officer application process because they're not governed by a Police Service Act. So how do we, bring them from here to here?
Yeah.
And that's probably not 6 months at depot. Might be 3, might be 2, might be 4, don't know. So I know there's work ongoing on that in the conversion side.
Okay. Hey, I really appreciate the time. I want to say I always enjoy having you in here and chatting, and we've got a bunch more we're going to do in the new year. So we'll have you back on or someone from the NPF, and we'll keep watching the news for you.
Well, no, thank you. It's been a great year, and hopefully you get some downtime over the holidays.
Yeah, I get a little bit. Hang on the line for 2 seconds. We'll say bye offline. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.